So 2 out of 3.
I will say the one thing.
Forgets the head. Oh, sure. On the second.
side so he could. All right, thank you. Bye. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. It is now 9:10 a.m. on July 28th, so I am calling this rulemaking hearing to order. Thank you all for joining us live or tuning in person to today's rulemaking hearing regarding the Tennessee Department of Education's rules on implementing the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Act, or TISA, also referred to as Chapter 966 of the Public Acts of 2022. My name is Rachel Supay. As Deputy General Counsel of the Tennessee Department of Education's Office for General Counsel and the designated representative of the department, I will be presiding over today's hearing. I want to introduce some other folks who are here with us today. First, we have two ASL interpreters, Amy Lankeet and Annie Belcher, and they will be signing for the entirety of today's rulemaking hearing. Additionally, we have Isaac Eicher, and he is a Spanish-speaking interpreter, and he will also be here for the entirety of today's hearing in case anyone, either virtually or in the audience, is in need of Spanish-speaking interpretation services. Please just indicate if you need such services, either virtually in the chat by either typing that you need such services, or if you're here in person, just raise your hand and let us know. I'm going to let Isaac introduce himself and say a few words.
Hola, buenos días. Yo me llamo Isaac. Yo soy intérprete de español y estamos felices de poder proveer este servicio. Yo voy a estar sentado aquí enfrente. Si cualquier persona necesita servicios de interpretación, me pueden venir a hablar y vamos a hacerlo. Y también si están asistiendo a la reunión virtual, pueden poner un mensaje y estamos felices de poder proveerles el servicio de interpretación. Gracias.
Today's rulemaking hearing is an opportunity for the Tennessee Department of Education to gather stakeholder feedback regarding Department Rule 0520-12-05, which implements the TISA Act. A limited number of copies of the proposed rules under consideration at today's hearing are available at the table in the front of the room, and they are also posted online on the department's website. Please raise your hand if you've not received a copy of the proposed rules, and we can distribute them accordingly. Information on how to join today's rulemaking hearing in person was included on the rulemaking hearing notice filed with the Secretary of State and posted on the department's website. It was also shared with the press through multiple media alerts. Information on how to join the rulemaking hearing virtually was also posted on the department's website. Since this hearing is being held both in person and online, the microphones and cameras of all online attendees have been disabled. This will minimize any audio feedback and ensure that the speakers can be heard. Please note that this hearing is being recorded and that by joining and participating in this hearing, you are consenting to being recorded. I'm going to begin with a brief background and summary of the proposed rules for the TISA Act. On April 28, 2022, the TISA Act was passed by the Tennessee General Assembly, and it became effective with Governor Bill Lee's signature on May 2, 2022. Through the passage of the TISA Act, Tennessee's K-12 public schools will now transition to a student-based funding approach and invest an estimated $9 billion in public education for the state, including state and local funds, which includes an additional reoccurring state investment of $1 billion starting in the 2023 to 24 school year. To inform the rule drafting, the department has undertaken a statewide public engagement process, which generated comments from Tennesseans across the state that were then considered in the rule development. The proposed rules were then posted on the department's website for comment on June 6th. And with that brief explanation, I'm going to now move into the procedures for today's rulemaking hearing. We will first take comments from in-person attendees. When those are complete, we will move to comments from our online virtual attendees. I will call speakers in the order in which they signed up to speak. And each speaker will have 3 minutes to share their comments on the proposed rule. We ask that each speaker begin by stating their name and any organizational affiliation, if applicable. After 3 minutes, I will politely move on to the next person so that we can accommodate as many speakers as possible. What I'm going to do is I'm going to step away from the microphone while you're speaking. When I step back to the microphone like this, it's an indication that your time is about to expire, so you should wrap up your comments because we're going to move to the next person. But please be aware that you are welcome to submit your comments in entirety, either through the mail or by email to tisa.rules@tn.gov or to the Tennessee Department of Education's mailing address, which I will put up on a screen for you all to see. And as long as those comments are received by August 2nd or postmarked by August 2nd, if you're sending them in the mail, they will absolutely be considered. Likewise, if you brought a hard copy of your comments with you today, we are happy to collect them for consideration. You may turn those into our Chief of Staff, Kristen McKeever. She's sitting right here at the front of the room. For those attending in person, if you have not already checked in by scanning one of the available QR codes that are posted along the room, please do so and make sure to indicate whether you would like to speak. I'm going to touch on a few more housekeeping items while you do that. When I call your name to speak, please come forward to this microphone right here. I'm also going to announce who is on deck. So when I call your name to speak, I'm going to also say the name of the next person who is up behind them. You don't have to get out of your seat at that time. Just know you're next so you can be prepared to come up at that point. Once we are finished with in-person comments, we will move to our attendees who have tuned in virtually. Virtual attendees who are wishing to comment on the proposed rules must also complete the sign-up link that is in the chat box. Please also make sure to indicate when you sign up virtually whether or not you'd like to speak. This will allow us to know who is next in line, and we can keep the meeting running as smoothly and efficiently as possible. Please remember that the purpose of this rulemaking hearing is for the department to collect feedback on the proposed rules to inform potential revisions to the permanent rules. The rulemaking hearing is not intended to be a question and answer session with the department. The department will not be responding to the comments made today, but will address each comment in writing when the permanent rules are filed with the Secretary of State's office. Additionally, please note that the department is charged with drafting the rules necessary to implement the TISA Act, but the department is not authorized to promulgate rules that conflict with the law. Finally, while attendees may feel passionately about these proposed rules, we ask that you treat one another with civility and respect. For our in-person attendees, please refrain from making any comments or utterances unless it is your turn to speak. Please be aware that attendees who cause a disruption, whether in person or online, are subject to removal. With that, we are now going to turn to our public comment portion of today's rulemaking hearing. Like I said, we are going to begin with our in-person attendees. As a reminder for those who are wishing to comment virtually, please make sure you have signed up using the link in the chat, and I will provide instructions on how to comment virtually at the completion of the in-person portion. I want to remind all attendees who have not yet done so to use a QR code that is posted around the room to sign up if you want to comment in person. Again, when your name is called, come to the microphone, introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes to speak. All right, so with that, we're going to go get started. The first name I have on the list is Carter Barnett. Great. Let me get my timer out. Thank you so much. Give me 1 second. All right, thank you, Carter. Go ahead and get started.
Hi, good morning. My name is Carter Barnett. Thank you, Tennessee Department of Education, for this time to speak on the proposed rules for the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Act. Something that I am passionate about is the transparency and openness of government and the ability for the public to be able to see clearly into the operations of the government. The Tennessee Alliance for Equity in Education website has a great analysis of the proposed rules, and so I'm speaking in support of their advocacy point of better transparency in TISA data collection and reporting. Referring to the draft rules at the bottom of page 21 through page 24, recommendations from the Alliance include that the state reports all existing and new data used to calculate TISA, including school and district level funding and district, state, and federal level per pupil spending data, and that all data used to calculate TISA is publicly reported in an annual, comparative, transparent, and interactive form, including on the state report card to promote stakeholder transparency. The rule is unclear how the data will be shared with the public and would benefit from greater detail on how and when data will be published to the public. I believe that this will help in making TISA data collection and reporting more transparent for Tennesseans and help create more trust in Tennessee's education funding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I realized I forgot to say who was on deck, so let me try this again. Next up, we have Emily Masters. Emily Masters, if you are here, you are up. And behind Emily, we have Terrence Gibson. Emily Masters, are you here with us? If not, I'm going to come back to you at the end. All right, Terrence Gibson. Behind Terrence is Brianna Summers. Brianna, you are on deck.
Greetings. I'm here on behalf of the Tennessee Education Association. TEA is over 157 years old, and we are composed of public educators throughout the entire state, which is range from teachers, education support professionals, principals, and administrators, and some directors of schools. Our mission is to protect and advocate for public school students, the teaching profession, so that all students have a great public education. We reviewed the proposed rules, and there are some concerns for us. The funding adequacy and equity is an issue. We hope that as the department develops these rules, that you solve the issue that our state government still does less in funding per student than neighboring states. Without continued aggressive increases in state funding, Tennessee will still be near the bottom in funding per pupil. The rules must include strong provisions that address race and class challenges with a focus on narrowing achievement gaps. We urge that the rules are improved by including an equity lens. The next concern is lack of transparency. A key talking point for TISA during our General Assembly was fiscal transparency. The proposed rules do not require the State Department, the State Board, or LEAs to publish information on how funds are allocated, budgeted, and spent in each LEA. The rules do not provide what is expected, that parents, educators, and citizens would know how tax dollars are being invested in our students. The rules should include an annual public knowledge and information sharing to help drive effective investment. The next concern is educator voice. Proposed rules do not allow for consistent educator input after implementation. The educators are the experts who will be living throughout the implementation of this, and we want to make sure that educator voice is always in the room annually. A rule is needed to provide annual input from Tennessee educators on the efficacy of TISA. Next are concerns in understanding the new policy implementations. For example, a major shift toward vocational training and CTE. All students in our state currently must take the ACT. This assessment is far less relevant for students gaining industry certification. Schools are evaluated on ACT, not industry certification. Such non-adjustments in the rules like this in response to new initiatives is not fair and have the potential for negative consequences or labels for schools and communities based on ACT scores. Finally, inadequacy of state financial commitment to educators. Improving educator pay and benefits is key in reducing the staffing crisis and shortages that we face in the education profession. The proposed rules provide mechanisms to drive state dollars into the teaching salaries, but still allows an adequate state support of insurance benefits. The state provides just a fraction of the needed funding. Many Tennessee educators pay more than the state employees for health coverage, and thousands pay more than double of what state employees pay. We have to address this issue in our rules. We urge that the department address the concerns as you all aim to do what's best for public education, and we as an organization offer ourselves as collaborative partners in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, next we have Brianna Summers, and on deck is Liza Ramage, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing anyone's names. So Brianna, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brianna Summers, and I'm excited to speak with you all today. I work for the Education Trust in Tennessee, a nonprofit that advances policy solutions to address achievement and opportunity gaps for Tennessee students. Over the past year and a half, we've hosted 13 plus webinars, 10 plus school finance, public resources, and worked with our over 70 alliance partners to support a student-centered, equity-driven funding formula for Tennessee. Most recently, we analyzed the TISA draft rules based on feedback from local and federal experts. I will share a brief overview of our findings with three major components. First, unique learning needs. Second, outcomes funding. And three, data collection and reporting. The unique learning needs weight allocates additional money for students like students with disabilities and English learners based on need. We support differentiated and substantial funding for English learners and students with disabilities. The current draft rules allocate funding for English learners primarily based on grade level. We believe English learners should be allocated and assigned to ULN tiers based on English language proficiency through the WIDA Access Assessment. There's only one other state that uses a student-weighted funding formula that assigns EL funding based on grade level. The majority use English language proficiency as we've recommended here today. English learners enter our schools at all grades, and their level of proficiency is what drives their instructional needs, not their grade level. Additionally, current draft rules allocate funding to students with disabilities, largely based on time spent in services. We believe that students with disabilities should be differentiated for funding based on the skills and abilities listed in their IEP or 504. Funding primarily based on time does not capture cost nuances because 1 hour of services can cost vastly different amounts based on teachers and resources required. Most states with a student-weighted funding formula differentiate funding based on disabilities, not time and services. Florida is recognized as a national leader here. Second, outcomes funding is additional bonus funds for districts to meet certain goals. We believe that the vast majority of funding, about 95% currently projected by TDOE, should be allocated through the base and weights for districts to have stability and flexibility. We're pleased to see growth measures included and additional funding for students from low-income backgrounds, students with disabilities, and English learners. However, we recommend that the draft rules prioritize consistency, inclusivity, and are targeted for districts to plan strategically. To increase consistency, we recommend consistent subject areas across elementary and middle school and a common growth measure across all goals. To increase inclusion, we recommend including English learners for additional funding at the high school level. And third, the number of goals, particularly at the high school level, may make it difficult for districts to plan and evaluate outcomes funding. We recommend an elementary math and reading goal, a middle school math and reading goal, and one high school ready grad measure because it includes college and career pathways and it's familiar based on our current accountability system. Third, data collection and reporting. Any funding formula is only as strong as the monitoring and evaluation procedures that are codified into rulemaking. We believe the draft rules should be clarified that all data used to calculate TISA will be annually and publicly reported in longitudinal, comparative, and interactive formats, including on the state report card and the TDOE data downloads page. Thank you for the opportunity to share feedback. We look forward to continued engagement. For more information, please check out our website and our social media. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. All right, next up is Liza Ramage. Hopefully I got that right. And on deck is Kent Foreman. Kent Foreman, you are on deck. All right, Liza, you may begin.
Good morning. I'm Liza Ramage. You got that right. Mother and grandmother of public school students, a retired MPS teacher, and a proud member of NOAA. I agree with the high goals for literacy in our schools. Strong reading skills are the foundation of an excellent education. Actually, the 70% goal stated in TISA is not high enough. We should have 100% of Tennessee children reading on a third grade level by the end of third grade. Nevertheless, the reality is that not quite 35% of our third grade students are reading on grade level. And similar statistics have held true for many years. No one questions that 70% proficient readers would be much better than 35%, but achieving this goal is a monumental task. TISA does not target any funds to create the seismic shift required to jump from 35% proficiency to 70% proficiency or to the 100% that we want and need. The old saying goes, children in grades 1 to 3 learn to read. Then, beginning in grade 4, they read to learn. If most of our Tennessee school children are not equipped to read to learn by 4th grade, we have a problem. The Tennessee Literacy Success Act provides guidelines for teaching literacy, but limited funding for resources to create the shift toward full reading proficiency. TISA calls for school systems to have a 15% increase in proficient readers in each of the first 3 years of the program. But given the historic lack of improvement and the lack of current focused investment, these improvements are unlikely. We know that Tennessee currently has a budget surplus. We recommend that these funds be used for all our children and fund the needed resources to teach all of our young Tennesseans to read. In general, the Tennessee education funding pie is just not big enough. We Tennesseans want our tax dollars to fund public schools that compare with the top 5th of the nation, not the bottom 5th where we currently are. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Kent Foreman, and on deck is Councilman J.D. Smiley Jr. Go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kent Foreman. I live in Williamson County. I'm a member of NOAA, which is the National Organized for Action and Hope. We are going to cover 4 topics this morning. You already heard from Liza with one of those. I'm going to cover the outcome bonuses part of the direct funding. We very much support incentivizing students with bonuses. However, we don't support unfair and inequitable application of the bonuses. On an annual basis, the department is going to allocate funds based on TCAP scores, ACT scores, and ready grad tests. And they're going to do it either via raw scores for individual students or improvements in those scores. And unfortunately, the formula that's being used, the rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer. To give you an example, Williamson County, where I live, 77% of the students are at that 21 or higher ACT level. Just the opposite of that, Clay County, only 48% of their students. The math says that Williamson County will use 2,400 as their multiplier for those allocations, whereas Clay County will use 34. You can see the disparity that's going to occur. The rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer. You might think that the incremental improvement might make a difference, but the expectation that somebody's going to improve by 3 points on the ACT, which is one of the measures, is really almost impossible. And so again, the Williamson counties of the world might be the ones that improve, while the Clay counties of the world will be ones that suffer. Let me give you an example of the improvement situation. In 2019 to 2020, comparing that to the 2020-21 year, Williamson County actually decreased their 21 and above ACT by 1.6%, while Clay County improved by 25%. Yet, they only achieved 48%, which is the raw number used to do the multiplier. We believe, from a NOAA perspective, that the measurement should be improvement in the LEA, not necessarily individual student raw number improvement. It's a shame that Clay County is not going to get a huge benefit by making such a dramatic improvement. We also want to make sure that on an outcome bonus perspective, that the advisory board that's going to make these decisions is well represented across the board, urban, suburban, rural, disadvantaged. That's a must if we're going to make good decisions about who gets the outcome bonuses. Ultimately, as Liza said, the pie isn't big enough. So regardless of all these issues related to individual topics, the pie needs to be bigger. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, Councilman Smiley Jr. and Dale Lynch, you are on deck. Go ahead.
Good morning. I am Memphis City Councilman J.B. Smiley Jr. I come to you today not as an elected official nor as a candidate for office, but someone who is deeply concerned about the education in the state. Growing up, I was always told that children are our future, but somewhere down the line, this administration seems to have forgotten. And I believe I know where it occurred. It occurred when this administration began to do the bidding of corporations and ultimately more concerned about the bottom line as opposed to the potential, the future, and the education of our children. Also around that same time, it became abundantly clear that this administration has unleashed hell on public education. And if I may suggest, I would suggest that this administration begins, instead of refusing to teach history the way it is, instead of allowing corporations to rip away the public education funding, instead of demonizing librarians, belittling teachers, and ultimately defunding public education, that this administration focuses on fully funding public education and using funding to mandate that teachers receive a salary commensurate with their work. Because if you do not, we the people are watching. And we'll do everything we can to send this administration into early retirement. Thank you so much.
Dale Lynch, and on deck is Joanna Daniels.
Thank you and good morning. I'm Dale Lynch, Executive Director with the Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents, or TOSS. I first want to begin by thanking the Department of Education, the State Board of Education, but most assuredly, all the teachers who are behind me here, and also the teachers and public educators across our great state who are actually in school, many of them today. So thank you for your service and what you do for our kids in Tennessee. I also want to thank the department for speaking directly with directors of schools and superintendents about the TISA bill. I'm going to take this time to specifically talk about the TISA rules that there are presented. I also spoke with the state board, so I will not recover those, but I do want to cover or share just a few of the comments that we think are very important. First, with the introduction to TISA, it states on page 1 that the rules beginning with the 23-24 school year, the base funding amount that each student generates toward the student's funding allocation in a given year. We would simply request that it be the preceding or prior year because we think that's extremely important. Next, in the definition sections of the TISA rule, we would ask that to look at page 3, number 14, dyslexia, individualized learning plan. We know that this is going to be an extremely heavy lift to support the many needs of our students here in Tennessee. With that is going to require great amount of opportunities for in-service and professional growth for our teachers. We need to make sure that the capacity is there from the Department of Ed to provide those services. Next, also under definitions, page 4, number 22, existing educator. Under this definition, Tennessee Code is very clear in the definition of a teacher. However, in the TISA rules, it also says provides direct services to students at school sites. That needs to be clearly defined, and it needs to be clearly defined quickly so that school systems, school boards, and superintendents know what to expect in the coming years. Next, I would also call your attention to the direct allocation sections on page 13, 2, Roman numeral 1 and 2, a local or regional approach of in-demand and high-wage occupations. I have heard from many superintendents and CTE directors across our state that a local or regional approach needs to be considered rather than a state approach. Next, number 6, under outcome bonuses, the commissioner it states that the commissioner shall convene a group of individuals. I've spoken directly with Commissioner Schwinn. I appreciate the acknowledgement that she has shared also with the state board. The Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents wants to be a part of that process. So thank you for that consideration. Lastly, on page 17 and 18, on 3C, it states define significantly exceeded expected growth for ELA and math. I would strongly consider that achievement and TVAS with growth be considered. Thank you for this opportunity and appreciate what you do.
Thank you so much. Joanna Daniels. Is Joanna Daniels here? All right, I will come back to Joanna Daniels at the end. Benita Doggett. Is Benita Doggett here? On deck behind Benita is Lynn Hoyt.
Good morning. Thank you. I am Benita Doggett. I serve as Director of Advocacy for the Memphis Education Fund. And over the course of the last month or so, we have held 4 informational sessions for community members, parents, practitioners, and school leaders to learn more about TISA and offer feedback for consideration by the department. Under that feedback, we get to section 2 under the definitions. We had questions of how will the department classify services for students with ADHD or autism spectrum disorders, considering that dyslexia is spelled out in the TISA rules. Secondly, the English language learner tier designation may not include all students and would rather see that this be used WIDA testing and assign tiers based on WIDA scores or proficiency. Also, there was a question around pull-out services and whether or not that included gifted programs. There's not language that includes gifted program services. In theory, it could be included in special education or IEP services, but it is not expressly noted. Under the base funding, we noted that the base funding is subject to appropriation each year, thereby leading to uncertainty on the actual funding level. And because the funding is subject to appropriation, there is concern that districts will still be burdened by unfunded mandates in consideration for that, like summer learning camps. Under the weights, we had a note that will the weight for students requiring DLIP services account for staff beyond an educator? The documentation required for students may also mean that schools and districts will need to fund extra staff to maintain records, so we'd like to see that considered in the weights component. We'd also like to see the inclusion of funding allocations specifically for social emotional needs of students. Under direct allocations in section 5, charter school allocations still need additional clarity. Is a charter school allocation an unrestricted fund or is it only for facilities? If it is only for facilities, in FY 2022, there was a one-time facilities allocation of $24 million and a recurring allocation of $6 million. With about 44,000 charter students, the recurring funding would only generate $136 per student. If it were $30 million in total, it would be $681 per student. What guidance will be provided to charter schools as they prepare for their budgets? Additionally, the department should provide clear language identifying how charter school allocations are distributed. For example, whether or not it will flow through the LEA or whether or not that money will be provided directly from the state to the charter schools. For outcome bonuses, considering that only about 36% of Tennessee students are considered proficient in English language arts, there is some concern that the outcome bonuses will reward academic achievement, not growth, thereby still perpetuating inequities within the funding formula. Specific criteria for significantly exceeded expected growth is needed for 8th grade students. On data collection, please provide clarity on data submission for charter schools. Will the data collection for LEA authorized charter schools be submitted by the LEA or by charter schools to the department? In addition to the feedback that we received from our members of the Memphis community, Memphis Education Fund would also like the State Board of Education Department to considering the following feedback regarding the TISA rules and implementation.
Thank you, Ms. Benita Doggett.
I'm sorry, thank you.
You're over time. Thank you, though. Lynn Hoyt. And following Lynn Hoyt is Heidi Campbell.
Hello, my name is Lynn Hoyt. I'm a former Nashville Public School parent and concerned NOAA member. I'm here to speak about the rules for cost differential factor eligibility and calculation, or CDF. I remind everyone that TISA is just a formula subject to the money our state chooses to allocate to education. It is understood that the Department of Education cannot change the statute language in the rulemaking process, but I'm here today to urge the department and the legislature to amend the statute as soon as possible to reflect a fair CDF. We need multiple measures to calculate CDF, and we must retain the shall language to ensure annual appropriations are made. Rule number 1 in CDF section currently reads, may provide funding, not shall provide funding. NOAA wants our state leaders to ensure CDF grants are funded in the next state budget. We strongly urge everyone in this room, especially Nashvillians, to hold the governor accountable for funding schools. Our property taxes close that gap, and the less the state funds, the more our local taxes make up the difference to fund schools across the state. A commitment to CDF funding can help, and our state is capable using our state budget surplus. In simpler terms, the CDF eligibility calculation determines extra school funding increases based on cost of living in your area. With inflation on the rise, the attention to getting CDF right is of high importance. Using a simple online cost of living calculator, I plugged in the OREA's average state salary for a teacher in Tennessee at $52,000 a year. And I set the cost of living difference in the calculator to live in Martin, where I grew up, versus Nashville, where I live now. A salary of $52,000 in Martin, Tennessee should increase to $72,000 in Nashville to accommodate the cost of living here. This is what the CDF is supposed to consider. It costs significantly more to live in Nashville, and that increase should be an obligation to our children, not an option. Also, we want teachers to be able to afford to live in communities they serve. Remember when you used to see your teacher in the grocery store and they knew where you lived? They knew your community. You cannot make those community bonds when you have to commute an hour to work because you can't afford to live where you work. It is a factor in our teacher shortage. Lastly, additional funding must be allocated. TISA only gives us a roadmap to divide the money pot. If the money pot is not the honey pot, we fail again to adequately invest in our children, which is reflected in academic outcomes. Children behind need more help, not less. Investing in education is investing in the future of Tennessee. To get ahead, we must pour all the honey we have into all of our sweet Tennessee children. Thank you for allowing me to comment.
All right. Next, we have Heidi Campbell, followed by Renee Pearson on deck.
Good morning. I'm State Senator Heidi Campbell, as a member of the Gov Ops Committee and somebody who listens to rulemaking hearings on a regular basis. I am concerned that we listen to these rules contextually. A lot of times I will be in a meeting and people will say that they're following the rules. But the Tennessee Department of Education is charged with teaching our children and taking care of our children. And these rules do not exist in a vacuum. And I encourage all of the members of the Department of Education considering this to think about how these rules are going to impact our children inevitably when taken in consideration with everything else going on. I'm concerned that TISA will be used to further defund public schools throughout the state of Tennessee. Backpack funding may sound good in theory, but in reality, this law will lead to schools being defunded brick by brick. As students leave, costs do not go down. There are still buildings, staff, and utilities. And where are these kids going? To religious schools? To unproven private charter schools? These rules should make clear that funding for students who are leaving our public education system is different than funding that stays in our system of free public schools. We cannot let this law be a Trojan horse for defunding public schools in every county. Our current funding is, with this new program, is still going to be in the bottom decile in the nation. The rules also don't address evidence-based practices in funding key support positions like RTI, counselors, nurses, and social workers. I really encourage everybody to think about how important it is to fully fund our public education system. what sets America apart is how well educated our population is, and we ignore that to our peril. Thank you.
Lynn Pearson. And on deck, we have Rebecca Spencer.
Thank you for the opportunity. I am Renee Pearson, and I'm an active ESL teacher. And I have concerns about the way the EL students are going to be funded. Number one is that the Libertas, we are most getting newcomers between the grades of 5th grade through 9th grade. And with those grades, some of the students have no literacy skills. So on this funding, they are now labeled as a Tier 2 support service rather than a Tier 3 support service. This really concerns me as an educator. We must concentrate on spending on the WIDA levels, especially the newcomer level 1 and 2, 3 and 4 for our students, and not on the grade. It doesn't seem logical, but the greatest cost and the greatest supports are on the newcomers level 1 and level 2. If the key and our heart and our passion is to have contributing citizens in this state of Tennessee, we must fund the EL students, and we must concentrate on the WIDA levels and not the grade. Thank you.
Rebecca Spencer. And on deck, Thomas Weber.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Spencer, former MNPS teacher, 20-year MNPS parent. I'm also a member of the State Action Committee of NOAA's Education Task Force. Our committee has spent a great deal of time studying TISA and conclude that it does not create a bigger pie. I'm here to speak to you about one part of the law that shortchanges our students, the definition of economically disadvantaged. As you know, the initial TISA rules limit the definition of an economically disadvantaged student to those who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. In many districts throughout the state, this measure is not accurate or sufficient. In fact, in MNPS, the number of economically disadvantaged students drops from 70% to 45% under this law. This law, of course, this loss is a significant amount of money. There are numerous reasons for this disparity, chief among them the administrative burden on a chronically underfunded, overstressed system to chase down these forms. Add to the fact that in many districts, there's a federal program that already ensures all students to receive free lunch regardless of completion of these forms. These forms are irrelevant to access to a meal. Certainly teachers who've been given this 15% improvement mandate have a better use of their time than chasing down an irrelevant form. Our recommendation is that TISA broaden its ED certified definition using existing data from TennCare and SAIP, which create a fair representation of what an ED student is. TISA rules need to include a clear and transparent process for LEAs to accurately estimate their number of economically disadvantaged students. If TISA really is an attempt to provide all Tennessee students with what they need, then the pie needs to expand. Economic corners don't need to be cut. Thank you for your time.
Thomas Weber. On deck, Emily Masters, if you are in the room.
Good morning, and thank you for letting me speak. My name is Thomas Weber. I'm the spouse of a 15-year educator. I'm also the father of 2 children in middle school, and I write a blog called Daggone Wild that focuses on education policy in the state of Tennessee and nationally. When I woke up this morning, I had no idea what I was going to say, none. Because I don't really understand all the rules. I don't understand all the implications. I don't understand where any of this is going. And I'm probably not alone. If somebody like me spends this much time trying to understand this, how can the average Tennessee stakeholder possibly know what's good? possibly know what the rules should say. Yet we're moving forward. You know, we create language. I hear CDL tossed around, and I hear ESL and WIDA and all these terms, and they're very valid terms, but much like the NFL, who calls it down and out, or red robin go, we create this special language that doesn't let people know. It doesn't give greater understanding, and we pass rules without people having a full understanding of what that means. What I do know is in about a week, schools will start again. And kids will show up to schools where parents don't know if they're safe, and they won't have enough teachers, period. There won't be enough teachers there. That's what it comes down to. And I would say, and I would argue, that's the two major components that parents care about, because without either of those, learning doesn't happen. I don't feel safe and I don't have a quality teacher. I'm not learning anything. You can measure all you want. Learning is not taking place. I don't see anything in the rules that ensures that we're going to make sure there's a quality teacher in front of every student. That's a problem. You know, at the very least, we should be allowed to direct fund raises for teachers. I also know common sense tells me that a counselor in Humphrey County, no offense to Humphrey County, costs a little less than a counselor in Davidson County. There's nothing in this that takes that into account. We need to take that into account. We always make things a little bit more complex than they are. The simple matter is we need to fund and ensure that every child feels safe and recognized when they walk into a building, and that they have a qualified, quality teacher in front of them. That should be the simplest. We can add all the, we can add all the bells and whistles after that. I always tell people that work for me, you always want part hanging fuzzy dice from the car before we drive it right. Let's take care of the basics, and that's what the rules need to consider. Thank you.
Emily Masters. Joanna Daniels. Joanna Daniels. Are you Ms. Daniels? Great. Ms. Daniels, you are our last in-person speaker, so no one is on deck right now. Take your time.
Okay. I apologize, I wasn't here in the beginning. Do I need to state my name or anything before I speak?
Please state your name and any organizational affiliation if you have one, and then you may begin your comment.
Okay, great, thank you. My name is Joanna Daniels, and I am with Safeguard Our Schools in Sumner County and just a concerned resident of Tennessee. I moved here from California in 2018 and came here because of the values that I have, and I felt that Tennessee aligned with them. And then, and as far as schools as well. And what has really concerned me with TISA is the fact that and how it's being funded. So I looked at the base amount of the TISA, and I'm not quite sure where it came from or how that formula was created. I then looked at some of the other states that were compared to, such as Arkansas, Florida, and a few of the other schools. I apologize, I don't have my notes in front of me. And I looked at a lot of the other states in the southeastern area that we were compared to, and a lot of those schools actually rate higher than us, or we are in alignment with. And I just want to bring about Florida right now. Florida has a base amount of about $4,400, and they rate higher than us in almost all scores. And yet, one of the things with TISA that we're excited about being is in the top 15 highest base amounts in the United States for funding. Well, as we know, money doesn't solve everything. And as a matter of fact, it sometimes causes more problems. So in comparison with the other states that we were being compared to in the southeastern part, as far as base amounts, I still don't know how we came up with a formula for $6,800 per child when it clearly shows that in other states that the base amount is lower and they actually score higher or the same as Tennessee. And so I really feel that we are throwing money at something that doesn't have the correct parameters on how to use that money, and that now I'm new to Tennessee. Now my money is being used improperly, just as it was being in California. And as you know, in California, they're redoing their formula, which is similar to the formula that is now being used for TISA. So that is my biggest concern.
Thank you. All right, we have two more folks who have indicated that they are ready to speak in person. Jennifer Owens, if you are in the room. John Ray Clemens, you are on deck.
Thank you. I'm Jennifer Owen. I am the 2nd District Representative for Knox County Schools, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the board. I'm just speaking as an individual. I'd like to point out that it isn't too late to roll this back. Comments leading up to TISA clearly showed that the public wasn't asking for a less transparent formula. They were asking for more funding, more spending. We know that a funding formula isn't a spending plan, and changing the formula does not address the continuing lack of a clear spending plan. The BEP isn't impossible to fix. The problem is that it's impossible to fix without greatly increasing expenditures. And that's our problem with TISA as well. Changing the formula is irrelevant to solving our education funding issues. If I brought a pie, and we've all talked about pie this morning, if I brought a pie to this meeting, it would obviously not be adequate for the people in this room. Putting it in a different pan doesn't change that. It just puts it in a different pan. It's still the same amount, and it's not adequate. Our school districts and our county governments cannot see sustainability. We can't find the sustainability in the plan. We're very concerned about that. Without significantly increased costs to local government over time, this can't be sustained. And that is a great concern. Knox County has seen a smaller percentage of funding for our schools for each of the past 4 years. And it looks like we can expect that disparity between local needs and state funding to continue increasing. We keep looking for clarity in planning for inflationary growth, and districts may find themselves implementing programs with TISA dollars in year 1, only to be forced to cut those same programs in year 2. The only way around it is to put in more local funding each year to supplement the difference. Our local governments cannot and should not be forced to try to make up for the state's failure to implement a serious spending plan. Everyone knows that our students don't come to us in neat little standardized packages, yet this formula assumes that every school should have the ability to package them into neat little set of standardized test scores, and that's nonsensical. Standardized test scores are illogical measures of what our schools are doing and what our students need. Basing funding on such measures is irresponsible and harmful to our students. At best, standardized tests measure the socioeconomics of the communities around them. I cannot imagine a time when we would be talking about giving our schools additional money based on the size of their homes or the size of the incomes of the neighborhoods in that area. Yet that's exactly what this formula does. Students spend around 12% of their time in our classrooms. The expectation that our schools can take everything we have and somehow make up for what's happening to our kids the other 88% of the time is absurd. Changing the formula is not the answer.
Thank you.
a spending plan is.
Thank you, Ms. Daniels. John Ray Clemens.
Thank you. My name is Representative John Ray Clemens. I have the honor of representing District 55 in the Tennessee House of Representatives. But today I speak on behalf of all 6.9 plus Tennesseans because education is our priority. Public education should be everyone's priority. As a state legislator over the past 8 years, I have fought multiple bills that undermine our public schools, attack the teaching profession, like vouchers, charter authorizers, a warm body standard for teaching qualifications, increased emphasis on standardized testing. But TISA is the single most dangerous piece of legislation because it facilitates and enables the flow of taxpayer money to every anti-public education scheme that has been presented in the past decade. This legislation was passed on two false narratives. One, that it was going to substantially increase funding for the state of Tennessee and education system, and that it was an alternative to the BEP. Unfortunately, TISA fails to address any of the inherent issues of the BEP. And while it was presented as an alternative, it is simply moving around deck chairs on a system that is sinking due to underfunding and bad policies that have been designed to undermine the teaching profession and public schools themselves. TISA evidences a continued clear disrespect for teachers, as verbalized by Larry Arnn of Hillsdale and others with whom the governor of Tennessee and the commissioner of education support and agree, and they have for years. TISA adversely affects urban school districts like Nashville, Shelby County, Hamilton County, and other growing school systems. There are no weights for urban districts. While there are weights for sparse districts or small communities, there are no weights to specially address the unique needs of urban school districts. There is no grant for Nashville, Shelby, Hamilton County. There are no guarantees of any funding in this bill to address the needs of the public school children in Nashville, Tennessee, or any of the largest school systems in our state. The cost differential factor is merely a may. That is unacceptable to address the needs of this city and the Nashville MSA. Nashville MSA is the fastest growing population. It is the biggest job producer, and it is the single biggest economic engine of the state of Tennessee. And we are undermining the very essence of public education by passing TISA and these proposed rules. Furthermore, TISA facilitates the clear intent to steer money outside of traditional public schools. The direct allocation for charter schools is purposefully vague in here. It's purposely unclear because the intent is to open the door and facilitate a scheme that has been promoted for the past decade to steer money outside of our public schools into private hands for purposes of profit and indoctrination. Furthermore, TISA provides no details. The legislation itself was vague, provided no information. These rules provide no further guidance to the state of Tennessee. As a previous speaker said, there is not enough to fully understand what is happening in this bill. Furthermore, this is structured to require every county school system in the state of Tennessee to increase property taxes in the next 4 to 6 years. It is inevitable. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Bill Lee and Commissioner Schwinn are putting us all on an airplane with 4 years of fuel, and they have the only 2 parachutes. We cannot allow TISA to be passed as proposed under these rules. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. I know there may be some folks in the room who are still wishing to provide comments in person. If that is the case, please sign up using the QR codes around the room. Make sure when you sign up on that form, you indicate that you would like to speak. So for anyone in the room who would still like to speak or present, please sign up using the QR code. While you are doing that, we are going to switch to our online virtual attendees for their comments. And then we will come back when they are done for any remaining comments from anyone in this room. All right, I'm going to next give instructions for our online commenters. I want to remind all virtual attendees that you must sign up using the registration form in the chat to speak, and we will add you to the list of speakers and call you when it is time to begin your comments. Call on you, rather, when it is time to begin your comments. When you hear your name called, please virtually raise your hand by clicking the reactions in the Microsoft Team window and the raise hand icon. Or you can also press Control-Shift-K on your keyboard. That's Control-Shift-K. If you're dialing in from a phone, press *5 on your mobile keypad, and that will raise your hand virtually. Once your hand is raised, we will enable your microphone and your camera. It's important that you also unmute your microphone on your end as well so that we can hear you. Once you're called upon, you will also be given 3 minutes to speak. We ask that you give your name and organizational affiliation, if any. And then you will proceed with your comments. I will let you know when your 3 minutes is up. Again, please remember to unmute your microphone once we have called on you as your virtual speaker. You are welcome to turn your camera on or off when you are presenting your comments. That is up to you. So with that, I am going to start the list of virtual attendees who have signed up to speak. The first name we have is Kim Kredich, and on deck behind Ms. Kredich is Jerry Denny. Bear with us one moment while we get this technology going.
Hi, am I connected?
Yes, we can hear you. Is that Ms. Kredich?
It is, thank you. I'll just
Great.
keep my camera off.
You are welcome to start your comments.
Thanks. I'm Kim Kredich. I'm not affiliated with anything or anyone, but I do live in Knox County and had 3 sons go through Knox County schools. They're all in their 20s, but one of those sons has autism, and I advocated very effectively for a wonderful education in Knox County. I wanted to comment on 3 aspects of TISA that I think could be improved. Number 1, include a statement of assurance that TISA complies with the IDEA state funding formula requirement to not incentivize restrictive educational placements, along with a clear explanation of how and why this statement is justified through TISA's emphasis on supporting inclusive educational environments through weights and bonuses. Also, a clarification of the word each in 0.43E to confirm what appears to allow stacked funding within each category and subcategory. I'm referencing when it says a student generates a weighted allocation for each of the student's UNLs. Number 2, I would suggest you add music therapy to language regarding services in addition to speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. Music therapy is, of course, considered a related service under IDEA that is provided throughout the state but is not widely understood as such. Our state post-secondary institutions offer music therapy certification programs, so listing this related service would create much needed awareness in our school systems. And my last recommendation is that somebody needs to take a very close look at the huge disparity among school districts regarding IEPs for students eligible under intellectual giftedness, or IG, and how this affects funding. For instance, Knox County has fewer than 10 IG IEPs, while similarly sized districts have literally thousands. This cannot be explained by a claim of robust general education programming, as there are surely high school level AP and honors courses available in all large districts. Will districts with thousands of IG IEPs get weighted funding through services listed on these IEPs, while Knox County gets funding for fewer than 10 students? Those are just some of my suggestions. I am encouraged by the improvements towards incentivizing or not incentivizing restrictive placements and incentivizing inclusive educational placements in alignment with the least restrictive environment provision in IDEA. Thanks for your consideration of these points.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Jerry Denny. Jerry Denny, if you are on the line, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you have a camera, you are welcome to turn it on.
Okay, can you hear me and see me?
I can hear you. Can't see you quite yet, but we can hear you.
Okay. Well, then I'm just going to go ahead and start. My name is Jerry Denny, and I'm part of a grassroots organization in Loudon, Tennessee, which is just southwest of Knoxville. The name of the organization is called GAP, G-A-P, which stands for Grandparents Aiding Parents. And we are very concerned with the state of education here in Tennessee. The TISA bill is so complicated that it seems like additional staff is going to be needed just to go ahead and try to interpret the results. Am I on? Can you? Are you seeing me yet?
Yes, ma'am, we can see you.
My opinion, and the opinion of many people in our organization and GAP, is that we would much rather see that money going to teachers' salaries than in having people try to work out the weighting and who gets the weighting, which I'm sure is going to be the local education agency. Also, the thing that is really bothering me about this weighting system is that so much of it is given in different degrees to English as a second language. As a taxpayer in the state, I'm just wondering how many illegal immigrants are given that money. And I'm not opposed to English as a second language, but a certain amount of it should just go a long way, and then the rest of it be up to the students to learn our language. There doesn't seem to be any incentive in the TISA bill towards excellent. Everything in the weighting seems to be geared towards those who are not achieving. It seems like the less a student knows, the more they're rewarded. And one of my ideas would be to aim higher. We have this idea that with children, everybody should be rewarded. I think that's a very distressing signal for us, whereas in other cultures, excellence is rewarded. There should be some funds allocated towards, in our particular area, we don't have a parent-teacher organization. To me, this forms better bonds between faculty and family. There should also be funds allocated for the local police department to educate our children about drug awareness. One of the teachers in our organization from New York said that she actually co-taught with the policeman in New Jersey to establish this. I think the United States was formed under an understanding that we are all created equally, not equitably. The weighting itself, I believe, is divisive and seems to indicate that certain people are less able to learn based on their race or their nationality, about where they were born. And I believe that children given the right teaching and a little bit of understanding can all learn.
Thank you, Ms. Denny. We are at time.
Oh, so soon.
You're welcome to submit your comments in full, online or through the mail. Thank you. Our next online speaker is Renee Grooms. Renee, if you can unmute, and Melissa Whitaker, you are on deck behind Renee. Renee Grooms, if you are on the line, you are next for public comment. Go ahead and unmute yourself and let us know if you can hear us. All right, we're going to go to the next, and we will try Renee later. Melissa Whitaker, are you on the line? If so, go ahead and unmute yourself. Melissa Whitaker. There we go. Go ahead and unmute your microphone, Melissa. Melissa, if you're able to unmute and turn on your camera, that would be great. We just need you to unmute it on your end, and then we'll be able to hear you. The unmute button, if you can hear, should be at the top right corner of your Teams. There should be a little microphone. If you can see that, Melissa, look at the little camera, the microphone icon, and click it in the top right corner if you can. All right, Melissa, we're going to come back to you towards the end and move to our next speaker, Brandon White. Brandon White, if you are ready, you can go ahead and unmute your mic. Turn on that camera if you'd like. Brandon White, if you are with us, go ahead and unmute yourself. Make sure to remember to raise your hand. So Brandon, if you are hearing me right now, make sure you raise your hand using the reactions feature so we know it's you. You can also press Control-Shift-K and that will raise your hand, or *5 if you are calling in by phone. So Brandon, make sure you go ahead and raise your hand for us. All right, I'm going to try our next virtual speaker, Bob Nardo. Bob Nardo, are you on the line? If you
Hi, good morning.
make sure you raise your hand. Oh, is that Mr. Nardo? Looks like
Sure
it is.
is.
All right. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If there were more time, I'd be more profuse in my gratitude for the state for the incredible vision of TISA. I just want to share a few things. I'm the director of Libertas Charter School in Memphis, although I'm speaking today just as a citizen. Libertas is a nonprofit neighborhood public school run by a board of volunteer neighborhood residents. I think some of the public officials who spoke today earlier are a little bit confused about the role of nonprofit community-based organizations like charter schools in the provision of public services. Many of them probably use hospitals or higher education institutions that are also nonprofits like us that operate with funding through as arms of public service. So charter schools are a welcome part of this, and I'm so thankful that the state has that vision. Our school is the most successful turnaround school in Tennessee. We took a public school that 8 years ago was the second lowest achieving elementary school in the state. Last year, we were the highest achieving school in our neighborhood, period, and the #1 charter school in Memphis. This is while serving a predominantly Black and low-income population. We also have the largest special education population in our district and are an exemplary program for inclusion. And so we can serve the most vulnerable children through charter school neighborhood nonprofit organizations. And I'm glad that TISA strengthens our ability to do so through weights and direct funding for ED, concentrated poverty, and students with disabilities, as well as the charter piece, which is needed given that many of us do not have access to some of the tax resources that taxpayers have already provided, like public school facilities to the school district. I just want to mention a couple of technical clarifications I think would be helpful in the TISA rules, acknowledging that some of these may occur in separate rulemaking processes about charter schools. One of which is, while I think the ULN vision is excellent, and in fact, the lower half of the ULN amounts are appropriate, levels 8 and 9 should be looked at a little further in terms of the dollars. Serving an extremely high need special ed population in our school, I can tell you that levels 8 and 9 can cost double or even triple standard student funding, and many other states are funding those equivalent levels at that rate. There's language in the bill about additional local share funding that county governments provide over and above their required contribution. The language needs to be clarified to ensure that state charter commission funded schools also have an equitable access to that. I'd also like to mention the charter authorizer fee needs to be clarified whether it applies only to the base, which would be my recommendation, because the amount of services an authorizer provides does not necessarily vary based on direct and weighted. It should be tied to the base. Last but not least, very quickly, the bill specifies that charter school authorizers must allocate federal funds like Title I and IDEA to charter schools and can only substitute that with services in lieu of funding if mutually agreed on by the charter school, not a unilateral decision by the district. That should be specified and clarified in the rules for the protection of other partner organizations. Thank you so much for this vision and the opportunity to share today.
Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to try some of the other folks who signed up to speak virtually. And just as a reminder for our online attendees, if you would like to comment, it is not too late. Please make sure to sign up using the link that's in the chat box. If you are attending virtually and you would like to comment, please sign up. It is not too late. We want to hear all of your comments. So I'm going to try Renee Grooms again. Renee, if you are on the line and would like to comment, please virtually raise your hand. You can do that using the reactions feature or Control-Shift-K or *5 if you are using your phone. All right, Melissa Whitaker, if you are on the line, please raise your hand. Okay, how about Brandon White? All right, with that, like I said, if there are any other virtual speakers who would like to sign up, it is not too late. Go ahead and do that. But I'm going to move back to our in-person speakers for the time being. Rachel Ann Elrod, if you are in the room and would like to speak, you are welcome to come up to the front of the room.
I was gonna say, you look like you're on purpose. Thank you. My name is Rachel Ann Elrod, and I represent District 2 within inside of Metro Nashville Public Schools, and have proudly done so since 2008. I'm also a public school graduate and also a public school parent, as my kids that are here attend the school just down the street. This is in my district. Metro Schools adopted a student-based funding formula about a decade ago because we believe it can provide a more equitable education system. That said, it must be designed and implemented well. Therefore, I am concerned about a number of issues, both mentioned today and not today inside of the rules. An equitable student-based funding formula should recognize that it costs more to educate a child in places like Nashville and provide adequate funding to do so. Additionally, as mentioned by Representative Clemens, I too believe that the charter school allocation is purposely vague, but more importantly, I believe most of the rules are vague and that there's many things that can be done to improve not only Nashville's allocations, but across the state. For example, a consideration of COLA and Nashville's fiscal capacity needs to be implemented. Urban districts like Nashville and Memphis need their weights within the rules to be considered. TISA proudly declares that it funds Tennessee school systems at 70% and that local funding is only going to be about 30%. However, the opposite is true in Nashville. In fact, we educate approximately 8% of all of Tennessee students, but only receive 2% of TISA's funding. This is even though we have a higher population of students with disabilities, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged. I know that you have heard some suggestions about those rules and how they should be better implemented from people like Ms. Lynn Hoyt. All of this together puts an unfair tax burden on the residents of Nashville. Nashville continues to have to carry the main fiscal responsibility of students in schools. It is important and the moral thing to do, but it also leaves us at a disadvantage for the other necessary services that need to be paid for by our tax dollars. We ask that you review the rules in a fair and considerate way so that it's equitable among all school systems and not just a few. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you all for attending. I believe there's one more speaker in the crowd who had signed up to speak. Is there a Miss Athena? Berthina, I'm sorry about that. Right on up. If there's any other folks in the room who have still not spoken, go ahead and sign up. You may begin.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Berthina Nabah McKinney. I'm a board member of the Metro Nashville Public School Parent Advisory Council, a former MNPS teacher, and a proud mom and guardian of 5 MNPS graduates, as well as a rising 4th grader. I also served on the Parent and Choice Subcommittee for the Tennessee Department of Education in discussing the TISA framework. I am concerned about the process the state used to design the framework, and I remain concerned about the lack of details in some of the pressing issues around how funding will be allocated to school districts for specifically economically disadvantaged students, dyslexia, English language learners, students with disabilities, as well as intellectual giftedness, and our career and technical education programs. As a Davidson County parent and taxpayer, I am also concerned that Nashville is the 2nd largest school district in our state, serving more than 81,000 students, yet receiving one of the lowest allocations of any of the 146 school districts across our state. This does not seem equal or equitable for students and staff in our county. I recommend that if we say that education of our children is a priority, we need to start putting our money where our mouth is and making sure that we get this framework correct and get it right for the betterment of our children and the staff that we want to educate them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this point in the hearing, everyone who has signed up to comment has done so. We are going to keep this hearing open until noon in case any additional speakers, whether virtual or in person, decide that they would like to share comments. We are going to continue to check every 5 minutes between now and noon to see if we have any additional speakers who have signed up using the QR codes. So again, if you are attending virtually and you decide that you would still like to comment, please do so using the link in the chat. And for anyone else who is in person, who might arrive between now and noon, please just sign up using one of the QR codes that is stationed around the room. Just a reminder for folks in the room, you are still welcome to submit your comments in full. You can do so with the information on this slide, either in person or via email, as long as they are received or the emails received or they are postmarked, if by mail, by August 2nd, 2022. You are all free to leave if you'd like, or you are welcome to stay till noon and listen to the other commenters. But thank you all for attending. We very much appreciate all of your feedback and comments on the rule.
I think she said enough.
Are we ready? All right, you are free to begin.
Thank you. My first comment, I think, is the document is very difficult to read. I believe this was meant for all Tennesseans, but from reading this, it probably cuts out quite a lot of Tennesseans from understanding what we're talking about. When I was reading this, I couldn't tell if public charter schools were in the same LEA as community schools. There was a page where it differentiated public charter schools from the LEA. So do charter schools have their own LEA? Are they all part of a different group? I couldn't quite tell from reading this. The other thing I saw, I saw something here about a long-term English learner. That's an English learner in year 7 of the ESL program. So that's the way I understand this is that's a person who has been in the ESL program for 7 years and still is unable to understand the English language. If I'm right, I don't know. It would be great to get some clarification there on what exactly is a long-term English learner. And I guess finally, I would just say that I thought the whole purpose of this was to fix the existing problems we're facing with public funding for our public schools. And maybe there needs to be a cover page that kicks it off, because it just kind of goes into legal. I feel like I'm reading a contract, and just maybe this is how all the rules are written, but I guess it doesn't clarify anything. It just seems like it's just a lot of words. And then final comment is, will there be opportunities to address this with the commissioner at some point? I believe the current commissioner we had, they were at the other events. I think there was like a road trip visiting different communities, if there was going to be more in the future. So those are my comments.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.